Nepal, and two particular reasons. One is historic, and the other is more to the current day. Historic because when I look at the independence of Bangladesh and the war of liberation that we had in 1971, Nepal was one of the countries that stood in strong solidarity with Bangladesh, whether it be moral support, whether it be material support. And when I called on the Right Honourable Prime Minister yesterday, I conveyed our gratitude. I think it's time I also do so publicly, because this is something that we are really grateful to the people of Nepal for. Other reason why I'm particularly happy, although I would rather be happy for some other reasons, is that when we talk about the mountains and the Hindu Kush Himalayas, this is ground zero for climate change. This is where climate change happens. And if we want to understand what is going to happen to the world, we see what is happening in the Himalayas today. So this is the proverbial canary in the coal mine. So if the mountains are healthy, the planet is going to be healthy. So this is really where the discourse should start. And I thank His Excellency, the Right Honourable Prime Minister, for his leadership in this issue. I remember he was very vocal during the last UN General Assembly. Then he took it forward to the COP28 process, and now we are here organizing a dialogue of experts. But we don't need experts to tell us what is happening. All of the excellent presentations that we have had, including from the Chief Minister, these are facts that we already know. It is nothing new. So why are things not changing when the science is so clear? When the science is so conclusive? Why are things not changing? We can talk about the impacts, we can talk about the effects, but if you only talk about the effects, then we become also part of the problem. So where does the solution lie? When we talk about solutions, we look at, if you are treating a disease, we look at the symptoms of the disease and the disease itself. What we are doing here is talking about the symptoms of the disease. We are not talking about the disease itself. And that disease is carbon emissions. So unless we decarbonize, whatever we try to do in terms of adaptation and resilience is never going to be enough. Here we are talking about resilience, we are talking about adaptation, but there are limits to adaptation. There are limits to resilience. We are asked to formulate national adaptation plans on the one hand, and our carbon emissions increase on the other. How can you solve a problem by making the problem worse? We are growing the problem and then we are talking about solutions. This discourse has to change. And when we talk about emissions, it doesn't really matter, with all due respect, whether Bangladesh and Nepal achieve net zero tomorrow. That is not going to make any difference to the global emissions. The G20 nations account for 81% of global emissions. And if I just think back to what Selvin Hart on behalf of the UN said, we have the moral voice. Yes, we have the moral voice. We talk about climate justice. And yes, climate justice, there are three elements that I would like to bring out. It applies to Nepal, it applies to Bhutan, it applies to Bangladesh. First is, as the Chief Secretary said, those who have least caused the problem are the most impacted, number one. Number two, those who have the least capacity to adapt are being asked to adapt beyond their capacity. And number three, governments are having to choose between fighting climate change and fighting poverty, promoting food security, promoting sustainable development. And that is a greater injustice. No country in the world should have to choose between fulfilling their development aspirations and fighting climate change. Why should it be either or? This is a problem that we have not created. And we saw from the Chief Minister's presentation that you need billions for your adaptation. In Bangladesh, just in this year, we have allocated $3.5 billion to fight climate change among 25 line ministries. That money could have been spent building roads, building hospitals, building educational institutions, empowering the youth, empowering the women, but I'm having to spend it on climate change adaptation. So to me, really, the issue is, why is there a lack of political will? Why is there a lack of political will? That has not been mentioned here. Why do countries commit time and again during the COP process and don't deliver? We are talking about trillions for adaptation. We'll be talking about a new finance goal in Baku. The billions have not been delivered, and we are talking about trillions. We can subsidize fossil fuels to the extent of $7 trillion a year, but the national adaptation plans are not funded. This, I'm sorry to say, but this double standard has to stop, because time is running out. Time is running out. What will you do when all the glaciers go? When all they melt? So for us, it's existence. If you don't have fresh water, how will the people of Bangladesh survive? And Bangladesh is squeezed, because we have got glacial melt in the north and we have got rising sea levels in the south. So the argument, the narrative in terms ties Trier loss. It's not just the mountains. It's the ice sheets, it's the snow, it's the glaciers, it's the permafrost. And how do we then globalize the mountain agenda? That is really the challenge that we have. And we are not just talking about